In the heart of the Ukrainian conflict, an unexpected force emerges, the Georgian Legion, with estimates suggesting a strength of up to 1,000 soldiers. These warriors are waging a war far from the comfort of their homeland, a fact which begs the question, why? Why would hundreds of Georgians voluntarily step into Ukraine's line of fire? What ramifications could this involvement have for their native Georgia? In short, these soldiers are driven by a sense of unfinished business. Back in 2008, Russia invaded Georgia, sparking the first European war of the 21st century. The echoes of this conflict reverberate even today, shaping the decisions and actions of the Georgian Legion. The West's choice to overlook Russia's aggressive actions arguably emboldened Russia. This set the stage for its subsequent military assertiveness 6 years later in Donbass, and now the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. Georgia and Ukraine find their destinies intertwined, bound together by a common adversary. Nestled in the temperate rainforest between the Lesser and Greater Caucasus Mountains and between the Caspian and Black Sea exists Georgia. The modern country covers an area of 69,700 square kilometers. Tbilisi is its capital and the largest city, home to roughly a third of the Georgian population. Historically, Georgia has changed hands between the Persians, Romans, Armenians, and Russians. And it would be during the endless Roman Sassanid Wars that Armenia, followed by Georgia, would adopt Christianity as the first countries in the world. This Christian identity would define these two people of the Caucasus, as it separated them from their increasingly Muslim neighbors. The Georgians would go on to resist Muslim attempts to conquer the Western Caucasus, after which the Georgian kingdom would reach its zenith following the conquest of Greater Armenia and Azerbaijan. However, its dominion over the Caucasus was short-lived, as invasions by the Mongols and Timurid empires would shatter the once mighty empire, after which the Georgian heartlands became a battleground between the Ottoman Turks and Safavid Persians. During the endless Russo-Turkish wars, the Russian Empire would come to conquer the Georgian lands from the Ottomans, as Russia sought to expand its southern border into the Lesser Caucasus. Georgia would briefly be a battleground during the First World War, when the Ottomans attempted to dislodge the Russians from their defensive positions, only to lose much of their northern territories. As the Russian Empire collapsed into civil war in 1917, the Caucasus would again be strategically important, as the Germans, Ottomans, and the British raced against each other for the Baku oil fields, while the people of the Caucasus wished for independence. Had the Central Powers won the First World War, it is likely that Georgia and Azerbaijan could have gained independence under German protection, who would have been driven by the desire to secure the oil from Azerbaijan. However, the German defeat in 1918 would leave the Caucasus at the mercy of its neighbors. Initially, Russian territories south of the Greater Caucasus were united under the Transcaucasian Democratic Federative Republic, only to swiftly break apart into the separate nations of Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. The Soviet Red Army would invade Azerbaijan in 1920, followed by a joint Turkish-Soviet invasion of Armenia. Following this, the isolated Georgian Republic was in 1921 invaded by the Soviets and Turks also. While Georgia lost its independence, it would become the Georgian Soviet Socialist Republic. Additionally, a certain Joseph Stalin, born in Georgia, would come to rule the Soviet Union in 1928. While the fighting of the Second World War would be relatively limited in Georgia to its border in the Caucasus Mountains, it would still play a vital role in the Soviet war effort. Not only would its factories contribute vital supplies to the Red Army, the Soviet Black Sea Fleet would also be based out of Georgian ports, following the fall of Novorossiysk and Sevastopol to the Germans. Administratively, the Georgian SSR was not a unified entity. The ethnic minorities in Abkhazia, South Ossetia, and Adjaria were granted autonomy through their designation as autonomous oblasts of the Georgian SSR. On the surface, it looked like the system of autonomy worked, as relations between Georgians and its minorities remained relatively calm. However, this calm was maintained by the presence of Soviet forces, ready to quell any unrest, while the status quo was forced upon people of Georgia from Moscow. During Gorbachev's reforms in the late Soviet Union, censorship eased, allowing long-suppressed tensions in the Caucasus to erupt into violence due to ethnic and historical grievances. As the Soviet Union faced its collapse, Georgia's aspirations for national sovereignty gained momentum. On April 9, 1991, Georgia's Supreme Council declared its independence following a successful referendum held on March 31. This bold step marked Georgia as the first non-Baltic Soviet republic to officially break free from the Soviet regime. Romania quickly recognized Georgia's newfound sovereignty in August 1991, bolstering its international standing. Georgia held a peaceful election that elevated Zviad Gamsakhurida, a prominent Georgian nationalist and Soviet dissident, to the presidency, with an overwhelming 87% of the vote. However, his presidency swiftly became mired in conflict, particularly with South Ossetia. Tensions escalated as political opposition emerged from authoritarian rule, leading to a dramatic showdown in Tbilisi on December 22, 1991. Loyalists to Gamsakhurida and opposition forces battled for control of the capital, culminating in the fall of Tbilisi on January 6, 1992. An interim government took charge, paving the way for elections on October 11, 1992. Eduard Shevardnadze emerged victorious with an astonishing 97% of the vote, only to face a fresh conflict in Abkhazia. Amidst the turmoil, Gamsakhurida attempted to regain power from exile, rallying loyal forces in western Georgia. However, his efforts were quashed by a joint offensive launched by Georgian, Abkhazian, and Russian forces. This campaign ultimately led to Gamsakhurida's demise, marking a turning point in Georgia's political landscape. Throughout this period, long-standing tensions in Abkhazia and South Ossetia escalated into inter-ethnic violence and full-scale wars. The support of Russia allowed Abkhazia and South Ossetia to achieve de facto independence, leaving Georgia with limited control over the disputed territories. Eduard Shevardnadze's return to Georgia marked a new phase in the country's governance. His presidency was characterized by both progress and challenges. Economic reforms were initiated and relations with the West improved as Georgia sought closer ties with the European Union and NATO. However, allegations of corruption and authoritarian practices within the government generated criticism from opposition parties and civil society groups. As a result, his rule would fall apart in time. In 2003, grievances over corruption and an ailing economy had reached a boiling point, driving citizens to demand change and accountability. The catalyst was the parliamentary elections held earlier in 2003, which were marred by allegations of fraud and irregularities. In response to these accusations, massive demonstrations led by Saakashvili swept through the streets, reflecting the determination of the Georgian people to assert their democratic rights. The intensity of the protests, coupled with mounting pressure on Shevardnadze's government, eventually forced the president to resign. The 2004 presidential elections saw Saakashvili elected as the new president, with an astounding 96% of the vote. This marked the end of the Soviet-era leadership in the country, signifying a decisive break from the past and a strong embrace of a more democratic and forward-looking future. Saakashvili's administration was characterized by a determined drive towards the West, with Georgia even being hailed as a prime location for business several times during his tenure, as he spearheaded widespread reforms across various sectors, including the police, military, economy, and government. He introduced drastic measures to cut down on bureaucratic spending, leading to the abolition of several ministries and a consequent reduction in government size. Saakashvili's government was characterized by a no-nonsense approach to crime, implementing a zero-tolerance policy. They also undertook a program of rapid privatization and economic liberalization, so this period saw Georgia's economy grow by 70% from 2003 to 2013, and per capita income roughly tripled. However, the poverty levels saw only a marginal decline, with about a quarter of the population still living below the absolute poverty rate. Georgia's standing in the Corruption Perceptions Index improved dramatically from a rank of 133 in 2004 to 67 in 2008, and further to 51 in 2012, surpassing several European Union countries. Additionally, the World Bank recognized Georgia as the 8th easiest place to do business and hailed it as the top economic reformer globally. As a staunch critic of Putin's regime in Moscow, Saakashvili did not shy away from expressing his disapproval of the Russian influence in post-Soviet states. But his unyielding stance against Moscow's imperialism made him a prime target, which didn't work out for him in the aftermath of Russia's invasion. On August 1, 2008, a tense situation in South Ossetia escalated when Russian-backed forces began shelling Georgian villages. Georgian peacekeepers in the area responded sporadically. However, even before Georgia's military response, some Russian troops had illicitly crossed the Georgian-Russian border through the Roki tunnel and entered the South Ossetian conflict zone.
Thousands of Russian troops and a great deal of military hardware is now firmly in control of South Ossetia. And I suppose it's now going to be very difficult for President Mikhail Saakashvili to ever get that territory back. Vladimir Putin himself, the Russian Prime Minister, has said that he thinks South Ossetia will never be reintegrated into Georgia.
Accusations of genocide and aggression against South Ossetia were hurled by Russia against Georgia, which led to a full-scale land, air, and sea invasion on August 8, referred to as a peace enforcement operation. It is worth noting that Saakashvili's heavy-handed response to the attack did significantly escalate the situation, giving a reasonable excuse for what was to follow. In an unprecedented move, cyber warfare was employed in conjunction with the military action, making it the first war in history where such tactics were used in tandem. Eventually, a ceasefire agreement was brokered on August 12th by Nicolas Sarkozy. Despite the agreement, Russian forces temporarily occupied several Georgian cities beyond the ceasefire period. Tragically, during the conflict, the South Ossetians destroyed many ethnic Georgian villages, resulting in ethnic cleansing of Georgians. In response, Russia recognized the independence of Abkhazia and South Ossetia from Georgia on August 26, leading to the Georgian government severing diplomatic relations with Russia.
Georgia, which says it was provoked into launching the first attack of this crisis, has been courting NATO membership and seems to have been counting on Western support, a serious miscalculation.
Although Russia mostly completed its withdrawal of troops from undisputed parts of Georgia, the war left a devastating impact, displacing 192,000 people. Following the cessation of direct hostilities, Russia would take advantage of the situation to stop Georgian entry into NATO by maintaining a peacekeeper presence in the separatist regions. The obliteration of Georgia's military power and the heightened insecurity of its borders, along with the open dispute with Russia, was too much risk to bear for NATO ascension in the eyes of many European countries. Furthermore, the war came at a dramatic cost to Saakashvili's political reputation, and it was accompanied by a systematic defamation at the hands of his political rivals. As a result, the roots of Georgia's current political situation can be traced back to the repercussions of the war. The West's interest was primarily in pacifying the situation. This approach, however, resulted in a tacit acceptance of Russia's aggressive actions. In March 2009, the Obama administration announced a reset policy in the US-Russia relations, effectively signaling that the aggression against Georgia was forgettable and forgivable. Bidzina Ivanishvili's ascent to power in 2012 marked a significant shift in Georgia's political landscape. His rise was seen as a part of the Western policy of resetting relations with Russia. Ivanishvili taking office as Prime Minister of Georgia marked the first peaceful transition of power to occur in modern Georgia's history. Initially, during Ivanishvili's tenure, the government continued towards its stated goal of European Union membership. However, a change in its overall stance became apparent in 2014, following Russia's annexation of Crimea. Georgia's response was noticeably muted, and the country's relationship with Ukraine, a fellow pro-Western nation, deteriorated. Many political analysts point to July 2021 as the pivotal moment in Georgia's democratic regression. The ruling political party, Georgian Dream, still led by Ivanishvili, decided to abandon a previously agreed upon political arrangement with the opposition. This agreement, mediated by the European Union and the US, was intended to foster political harmony and advance democratic governance. The pact represented a significant step towards salvaging Georgia's democracy. The breaking of the agreement was seen by many as Georgia's Yanukovych moment, echoing the refusal of former Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych to sign the EU Association Agreement. Georgia's democratic erosion has escalated since then, through increasing control of the judiciary by the government, harassment of civil society, and a rapid deterioration of relations with the European Union. In response to the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, Georgia has officially declared its intention to remain neutral, even accusing the US of attempting to draw it into the war against Russia. At the same time, trade between Georgia and Russia continues to flourish, leading to accusations of Georgia aiding Russia in evading sanctions. And a proposal to impose sanctions on Ivanishvili were made in the US Congress. While there is no definitive evidence for this, and Tbilisi vehemently denies the accusations, the frequency and gravity of accusations suggest attempts to violate the sanctions regime might indeed be occurring. This led to heated arguments between the US ambassador and Georgia's government and parliament representatives. This problematic situation is compounded by the EU's unwillingness to accept Georgia into its ranks. After its failed 2022 bid to join, Georgia was given a list of reforms which must be implemented in order to be considered for candidate status. The EU's recommendations included a commitment to de-oligarchization, a clear reference to Ivanishvili, who is still considered to be the leading man of the Georgian Dream Party. The EU's decision to deny Georgia candidate status has led to the biggest protests in the country since the 2003 Rose Revolution. So on the one hand, the country is grappling with the aftermath of its failed EU bid and the resulting public discontent. On the other hand, it is dealing with increasing Russian influence and the associated pressure of an aggressive neighbor. This is not to mention the likely short-term economic benefits of maintaining cordial relations with Moscow in its hour of need, which I'm sure many of the named oligarchs are happy to seize upon. So while people's true aspirations might be guiding them towards European integration, the short-term benefits and fear is steering the country back into the hands of the Kremlin, especially considering there is still no date set for EU candidacy status. The dream of joining may just be becoming a bit too elusive for the more pragmatically minded individuals. Overall, it appears that the Georgian Dream Party is reluctant to incur the social or political costs of the reforms essential for integration with the West. It is claimed that the Georgian Dream Party is seeking reapproachment with Russia while maintaining a facade of Euro-Atlantic integration. The West finds itself in a quandary over Georgia. Despite its disloyalty, the EU and the US feel obliged to support it in light of the conflict in Ukraine. However, this support is predicated on Georgia's compliance with Western standards. There are indications that power in Georgia could shift not through elections, but through street protests that spur the creation of a new political force, as the majority of Georgians still identify as pro-Western. But it looks like everything will come down to Ukraine. The result of the conflict will play a pivotal role in deciding the future course of Georgian politics. Georgia will either resume its journey towards European integration or slide into the Russian camp. A stalemate in Ukraine would likely see the pro-Russian networks in Georgia remain on top, winning the next election and proceeding to normalize relations with Russia. This would also mean no more discussions about restoring Georgian sovereignty over Abkhazia and South Ossetia. Meanwhile, Georgians who have fought against Russia in Ukraine would find their government ready to realize threats of revoking their citizenships. However, if Russia suffers a significant defeat, the democratic opposition in Georgia may score a win in the parliamentary elections coming in 2024. Above all, it could see the current Georgian president demand for a Russian withdrawal from Abkhazia and South Ossetia as part of a peace deal for Ukraine come true. The overall situation in Georgia is on life support. as is its former president, Mikhail Saakashvili. He is currently serving a 6-year sentence in Georgia and on trial for violently dispersing an anti-government rally in November 2007 and illegal border crossing. He has rejected those charges, calling them trumped up and politically motivated. His health is in a dire situation, since he went to prison in October 2021 and staged repeated hunger strikes to protest his incarceration. In early December, his legal team distributed a medical report that said he had been poisoned with heavy metals while in custody and was at high risk of dying without adequate care. His lawyers have sought to have his sentence suspended so he could be transferred abroad for more intensive care, as Saakashvili's health struggles are worsened by the denial of necessary medical treatment. The democratic health of Georgia is also stifled by political instability and accusations of fraud. Just as the former president's condition is seen to be aggravated by factors beyond his control, the democratic fabric of the nation is being undermined by external elements and oligarchic control. Balancing the desire for Western integration with the realities of geostrategic pressures, Georgia finds itself at historical crossroads. As it navigates these choppy waters, it will be interesting to see which path the nation chooses: a course towards the EU or a turn to its historical adversary. For the sake of this beautiful and ancient nation, I hope it's the former. Next, watch my video on Hungary, another nation being pulled in different directions. And this is my Patreon map. Everyone here is a legend. Thank you all for your support. Geoperspective out.